Well, hi there. My name is Mike Carr, and we're relaunching the Autism Labs website for parents and caretakers and siblings of profoundly autistic individuals. And our hope is this is going to help the entire family, everyone that's involved with a son or a daughter, or a brother or a sister, or a nephew or a niece, understand what's going on, especially with the profoundly autistic. They're typically nonverbal or they have limited verbal skills, like our own son who's 34 years old. But we'll be involving a lot of other parents in this discussion over the next few weeks and months and hopefully years, talking about our learnings, right? The journey we've been on, but more importantly, in a very optimistic, we hope, upbeat way, what's worked, what hasn't worked, how we've dealt with a lot of the challenges that many of you are dealing with. We'd like to invite you guys to participate in our online communities and even on this podcast. If you'd like to be part of the podcast and have a conversation and share with us some of the things that you've tried and haven't worked and where you are in your journey, we'd love to do that, because this can be a really stressful, disruptive path to be on. But we also think it can be one of joy and excitement given all the new things that are coming about. So just to give you a little bit of a story, our son was diagnosed in 1990. He was one years old. We were in Dallas, Texas. At the time, the incidence rate was 1 in 10,000. Today, for many of you, you probably know this if you're a parent that follows this, the incidence rate, according to the CDC, in their April of last year article and paper, is 1 in 36. So big issues, right? A lot more parents now are going to be concerned than there were back in 1990. And we took our son to the expert in Dallas, Texas, and he went through a very involved diagnostic process, and he came back and told us, no way does your son have autism. And of course, it turns out that our son not just had autism, but he was profoundly autistic, nonverbal, behavior problems, spinning, self-stimulation. He has seizures. He's on 4 seizure meds. A lot of the journey and a lot of the paths that you guys have gone on, and we've tried all kinds of things. We've taken him to some of the best therapists around the country. At one point, I can remember back in the early 90s that someone looked us in the eyes. And you guys have probably had the same experience, and it's so disheartening. And said, you know what, Mike and Kay, I think you'd be better off just putting your son in a state hospital, because the disruption it's going to create in your lives is, you have no idea. And we're thinking to ourselves, are you out of your minds? This is our son. We are not going to put him in a state hospital and forget about him. And I'm sure many of you feel the same way. And my wife's been the real advocate here. She doesn't understand the meaning of no. She doesn't understand, well, we can't accommodate him. We can't handle that. We can't do that. Well, there's no technology out there. She has a strong engineering tech background. We both do. And so we've been sort of riding the wave of the newest technology and trying things and seeing what's worked and what hasn't worked for our son and for others too. And we want to share some of those learnings with you, especially some of the things that are happening today, which are really cool, and some of the things that we think are about to happen, so that we're all sort of on the leading edge, right? Not the bleeding edge, but the leading edge of what actually works for certain folks. And not that everything's going to work for everybody. It's a very individualized situation, and we know that. So the purpose of this podcast, and this is episode 1 of our new Autism Labs podcast, is in 3 areas. We want to talk about jobs. You may think that's a bit weird, but we're going to talk about that because there's a lot of cause for optimism there. We're going to talk about technology, which I've already mentioned. And the toughest thing we're going to talk about is residential living accommodations when you really no longer can take care of your son or daughter. We want to sort of be proactive and try to find an environment for our son and others like him that's joyful and purposeful and upbeat and ongoing learning and jobs out in the community, things that you would aspire for your own kiddos that weren't, neuro-challenged or had special needs or had intellectual development disorders, IDD, and all this other jargon. And we're going to try to avoid a lot of jargon in this podcast just because I think it gets in the way of effective communications. We're certainly aware of it, and we'll talk some cases about it, like profound autism has a definition that was developed in 2021. And we like it because to us it sort of helps us and helps probably a lot of folks like us understand, the Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man was not representative of anyone who has profound autism, right? Profound autism folks are characterized by a variety of things, and not all of them apply in every case, but some of the characteristics of the definition that's now used by the CDC and others is perhaps an IQ of less than 50, nonverbal or limited verbal skills, perhaps better receptive skills than expressive skills. So if they can talk at all, their vocabulary is very limited, or they do it with icons on an iPad or something like that. However, they might understand more. They might actually receive more and have a better receptive vocabulary. So let's back up and let's talk a little bit first about jobs. And we started a Jobs for Autism Facebook page over a decade ago. And if you go out onto Facebook and you go for Jobs for Autism, JOBS, the number 4 autism, you should be able to find us. I think we have 700, 800 followers. We've got a lot of job postings there. Many of them, though, are for the higher functioning folks. And that goes back to what I was trying to talk about with respect to profound autism versus the higher functioning. There are a lot of accommodations, a lot more anyway, for those individuals with autism that do have great communication skills, right? Or it looks like they might be mainstreamed. And there are more of those folks out there than there are profoundly autistic. The data from the CDC that's the most recent is somewhere between 25 and 30% of autistic children that are 8 years old are profoundly autistic. And that statistic, we think, hasn't changed that much. It's probably gone up a little bit, but that means 3/4 are not. And so most of the press, most of the attention, and I think many parents that may be listening to this understand the frustration we have when you're talking to your friends and they say, oh yeah, we know someone that's autistic and they've got a job at Home Depot and they're doing pretty good, or they're living independently or with a buddy. That's not what we're talking about, right? As parents or caretakers of our autistic kids. They're not going to be able to do all those cool things, at least not without a lot of help. We're going to talk about things that we believe work, where there's scientific data that it works, our own experiences, and so I want to give you one of our own experiences. So our son, who is 34, the TWC, the Texas Workforce Commission, evaluated him, said he's unemployable. Not a chance, right? A buddy of his, a little bit higher functioning, a little bit more verbal skills, but still profoundly autistic, also TWC, unemployable. Guess what? We've been able to find a job where both he and his buddy have paid employment, right? This isn't volunteer. Paid employment 2 days a week at a Crux climbing gym in Austin, Texas. It is amazing. And we never thought he could do a lot of the stuff he's doing there now in terms of his job. And it's cleaning stuff and it's wiping things down, and he enjoys doing that. But there are other things that a little bit higher functioning folks could do as well. And then he actually gets to have some fun. So part of what we're doing with finding employment for profoundly autistic individuals is matching a job with the actual skill set that they have, whether they can communicate or not, whether they have seizures or not, whether they have behavior or not, and then in an environment that is upbeat, that is in the community, that's not at night when nobody's around, or that's isolated. And that makes a lot of parents nervous. Well, what if my child has a meltdown? That's part of the environment we're looking for, is that with the staffing and the supports in place, not a problem. We anticipate issues, we have protocols in place, huge difference. There is no reason, in our opinion, for anyone to give up hope on their son, daughter, sibling, brother that's profoundly autistic to have a meaningful job. Something that they get some joy out of, that they're actually making a contribution, that the folks in the community see this. We've actually had people at the gym change their workout schedule so they're there when our son and his buddy and some others now are there too, because they get joy out of it. They get fun out of seeing these folks contribute, and they help them out some. And it's amazing how folks, when they see profoundly autistic individuals out in the community, and recognize the challenges that they're having and some of the unusual behavior, but that they're real people and that they're trying to help out and they're doing actually a job. And climbing wall 30 feet high, I mean, we've got all the safety gear there, the belay ropes and all that kind of stuff. But it's just so much fun and so much joy to see someone that you never thought would be doing this, like our son, halfway up this wall. He won't even grab on anything, at least he didn't used to. Now he's a little better at it, right? Now, as far as technology is concerned, we are both tech people. My wife and I both come from tech backgrounds. There's a lot of technology available today and it's coming out. But there's a problem of, well, what's right for me? Yeah, right. I know there's a lot of tech out there, but what are the best apps? What are the best programs for my son or daughter to use on his or her iPad if I have an iPad? Or if I know they're going to have a meltdown and the behavior is going to be really, really a problem, like screaming memes, hair pulling, aggressive behavior that you have to be able to address in some form or fashion before it gets totally out of hand. Well, we have protocols in place, and there's technology coming out, like just a wristband. Some of the smartwatches, some of the other fitness stuff can detect heart rate increases, perspiration increases, and a little app maybe or a little alarm on your smartphone. Hey, so-and-so is fixing to melt down. We've sensed that there might be a problem, right? Now, heart rate increase, perspiration increase isn't always because there might be an issue, but if normally you would not see that, then yeah, that kind of tech might help the trained staff person intervene and say, hey, what's going on? And take them out of that environment that's causing stress or calm them down before it becomes, a real event. And so there are lots of things like that. We are following AI very closely. We play and work with AI almost on a daily basis. The developments there are exciting. There's a lot of stuff that, is a bit of smoke and mirrors. You can remember some of the fads and some of the excitement around things that at the time we were very skeptical of, like hyperbaric chambers. And maybe hyperbaric chambers work for some folks, but there was this huge push, oh yeah, you put them in this chamber, you pump up the pressure, they get better airflow, and that's gonna solve some of these problems. This was ridiculous. This was just crazy for most people. And these things weren't cheap, You could go someplace maybe that had one and pay a whole lot of money for a series of treatments. Or if you're really wealthy, you could buy one of these things and put them in your home. And it just made no sense. And so for decades now, there have been these little spikes of, this is the new silver bullet. This is the new cure. This is what's going to make all the difference. And we're very skeptical of that. We'll try to share with you things that we think have moved the needle a little bit for our son and for others like him. We'll have other parents. We'll have some folks that are developing these types of tools. Robotics is pretty exciting too, right? You think about maybe there's a way, instead of having your son or daughter parked in front of a computer screen playing video games, isolated all day long in their room, is getting out and enjoying other types of technology, but in a more social setting. Now, our son is so low functioning, he doesn't really get into video games, although he does enjoy playing simplified versions of that on his computers. But he won't do that, ad nauseum. But we know a lot of parents like ourselves, that's sort of the status quo. When we try to do things and we try to share with you techniques, therapies, procedures that get them out of that bedroom, and they want to get out of the bedroom, right? When they go to a Crux Gym or they go to a video arcade, they maybe can still play the games at that video arcade, but they're doing it in a social setting with a bunch of other folks like them, and it's fun and it's joyous, and they get to take a break and go outside on the picnic table and have lunch, right? And then they come in and maybe do a little bit of cleaning, right? So it's this combination of recreation and of job, vocation, and of technology, right? Using the latest technology that we think is going to hopefully give everyone a much better shot at a joyful, fulfilled, exciting, fun life for their profoundly autistic son, daughter, brother, sister, and for themselves, right? If you feel like, hey, they're finally getting out and doing something I never thought they could do before, that sense of guilt, at least for me, is much lighter, right? And the stress and the concern and the worry, big deal, right? It's just not quite as strong as it once was. And then the third area that I mentioned was residential living. Now, this is a real challenge. We we went down a very wrong path there. So a couple of years ago, we thought we're going to do this first, right? We're going to build the home in the community for our son and a few others like him, and we're going to start there. And we actually purchased a lot near Texas State University down in San Marcos, Texas, that was very close, it was walking distance of the university. And we've worked with the University of Texas here in Austin, where students will be involved in our son's program. Some of the professors in different disciplines, whether it's special ed, kinesiology, speech, nursing, will become involved. And it's a great, great dynamic, but you need to have a place nearby. Well, before we got too far down that path, we purchased the lot, but we actually hadn't started construction yet. We discovered with the help of a consultant that this is really tough, and there are all kinds of licensing issues. There are a variety of other regulatory issues with respect to the building itself will have to be built very differently. And we're not just talking about ADA compliance. We're talking about you have to have sprinklers, in the attic and things you would not normally think about, depending upon where you are in the country, to make sure that you're up to code for an assisted living facility or a group home or whatever you're classified as. So we've got a lot of learnings there about things not to do. And we've talked to some folks that have successfully done that and can certainly share with you some of the things that have worked for them. So we're hoping to provide a lot of learning, a forum for discussion, conversation. We'll be launching some communities that we would love to have anyone that's interested participate in, so that we can start to share our own experiences, right? And just try to find people like us that are in a similar situation and not feel quite as isolated, or maybe just a few local friends. So part of what we're going to do is open up that community. I think Facebook might be the first place, but we might also have a Discord community for those of you that are a little younger, for the siblings, the brothers, and all that kind of stuff. We will try to cite sources of information that are data supported. One of the sources I'd like to cite right now for you, it's an article that's a very easy read. It came out in the Washington Post in November 18th of last year, so November 18th of 2023. It was written by a gal that I think did an amazing job at collecting a lot of data. Her name was Catherine Ellison, and the title of the article, A Rift Over Profound Autism. It has a tremendous amount of, I think, relevant data and best practices, updates, and all that kind of stuff. The last thing I want to leave you with is there was a podcast I listened to from January of this year, so January 21st of 2024. It was a Speak Now podcast, which is the Autism Science Foundation, and Dr. Yan-Ru Chen, who's at the Boston University, was talking about some of the research she's done regarding language and communications. Because we know for our own son, I think probably for many of you that have a nonverbal or slightly verbal individual, just understanding how they're feeling, like, are you sick today? Or what do you really want to do? That can be a huge problem, and we know it creates frustration on both sides of the fence. For your son or daughter, for our son for sure, and for us too, because we don't know what to do. It also talks a little bit about the rift between the parents of profoundly autistic folks and the parents of what I would call higher functioning autistic individuals, or individuals that don't require the same degree of support. We don't want to take any political sides here. We will cater and have on, over time, technology and jobs and discussions for the full spectrum. But we definitely are going to focus more on the profoundly autistic, partially because that's our own selfish interest, that's where our son's at, and partially because that's the community that's probably had the greatest problems, the greatest challenges in getting the kinds of supports they need, because they cost a lot of money and they take a lot of effort. When you require one-on-one care for your son or daughter from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed, because they might express pica behavior, which is where they'll eat anything they see, like our son does. So he's walking down the street and he picks up a rock and sticks it in his mouth, or picks a leaf and puts it in his mouth. So it's that kind of stuff that we want to be sure and talk a lot more about. Not that we'll exclude the other side, but we're not going to get into a debate about, who's right and who's wrong here. We just think there's such a need, and we hope you guys will participate and help us understand what your concerns are. So just to close, the journey that we want to put you on and help you with and let you help us with is to make anyone that has a profoundly autistic individual, that person's life more upbeat, more joyous, more positive, more optimistic, right? With a future that bodes well of possibilities because of tech, because of new medical breakthroughs, and because there's this huge increase in this population. There's not enough money in this entire country to take care of those folks unless we figure out a way to, make them employable, give them jobs that they enjoy, put them in communities that are fun and vibrant and exciting, get other folks involved that maybe are naive or don't really understand profound autism versus the other things. At the end of the day, this journey is going to be upbeat. I promise you, we're going to try to deliver things that brighten your day a little bit, especially when you've had a tough time and the school's called and said, your 21-year-old who's not yet aged out of our transition program at 22 is just acting up today and we can't have him here anymore, right? We want to help you address those kinds of situations, talk to others who've gone through that, discuss strategies for avoiding that or mitigating that in the future. And with all of us working together, we really think we can add a little joy, a little brightness, and a little fun to this journey. So until next time, keep those spirits up and hope you have a great day and a great week. See ya.